Lila had just finished another long shift at the hospital. The night had been busy, with constant beeping monitors, rushing footsteps, and soft whispers of tired nurses trying to keep things calm. By the time she finally clocked out, her body felt heavy. She could barely keep her eyes open. The streets outside were quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. The air was cool and a soft drizzle had started to fall. She wrapped her scarf around her neck and walked slowly toward her small apartment building a few blocks away. Every step felt like she was carrying the weight of the entire day with her. When she reached her apartment, she dropped her keys on the table and kicked off her shoes without even turning on the light. She tossed her phone onto the couch and sank down beside it, rubbing her tired eyes. She meant to check her messages, but her head leaned back for just a second, and before she knew it, sleep had pulled her in. The phone buzzed softly beside her. The screen lit up, showing an unknown number calling. But Lila was deep asleep, her breathing steady, her mind drifting far away from the world. The phone rang for almost a minute, then went silent. Hours later, when the first light of dawn started peeking through her curtains, Lila stirred awake. Her neck hurt from sleeping in an awkward position, and she groaned softly. The phone was lying face down beside her, still connected to the charger. She picked it up and noticed the notification. One missed call from a number she didn't recognize. The time showed 12:07 a.m. She frowned a little. "Who calls at midnight?" she murmured, rubbing her forehead. Maybe it was a wrong number, or maybe someone from work. But if it had been from the hospital, they would have left a message or called again. Still half asleep, she clicked on the number and stared at it for a few seconds. Something about it felt strange, like it was familiar somehow, but she couldn't figure out why. She thought about calling back, but something held her back. It was too early in the morning, and honestly, she was too tired to think much. She shrugged it off and went to make herself some tea. As the kettle started to whistle, Lila leaned against the counter, staring out the window. The city outside was waking up. People rushing to buses, kids heading to school, shopkeepers unlocking doors. Life moved on as usual. But something about that missed call stayed in the back of her mind like a quiet whisper she couldn't quite ignore. After breakfast, she grabbed her bag and headed out for her morning shift. The hospital was already buzzing when she arrived. She greeted a few coworkers and got to work, checking on patients, adjusting medications, and doing her best to stay focused. But every time she took a short break, her mind went back to that missed call. Who could it have been? She told herself it was probably just spam, but the thought didn't sit right. Something about the timing, midnight, right when she was asleep, made it feel more personal. Later that day, during lunch, she finally decided to check if there were any messages from that number. She opened her voicemail, and to her surprise, there was one new message. Her heart skipped a beat as she pressed play. At first, there was only silence. Then a man's voice came through, shaky, quiet, almost desperate. He said, "Please, it's urgent. Call me back." That was it. Just those few words. Then a click. Lila froze. The message was short, but something about the tone of his voice sent chills down her spine. It didn't sound like a prank or a wrong number. It sounded like someone who really needed help. She quickly called the number back, but it didn't connect. A robotic voice said the number was no longer in service. Confused, she tried again, but it gave the same message. She sat there in the small break room, holding her phone tightly. Her mind started racing. What if someone had been in trouble? What if that call was meant for her by mistake, but she could have done something? She shook her head, trying to calm down. "You're overthinking again," she whispered to herself. Her co-worker walked in and noticed her worried look. "You okay?" Lila forced a small smile. "Yeah, just a weird call last night." "Probably nothing." Her co-worker shrugged. "If it's important, they'll call again." Lila nodded, but deep down she knew it wasn't that simple. She didn't know why, but she couldn't let it go. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The sound of the man's voice echoed in her head. "Please, it's urgent." She replayed it again and again in her mind, trying to make sense of it. Who was he? What was so urgent? Eventually, exhaustion took over and she drifted off into sleep. But her dreams weren't peaceful. She found herself standing on an empty road under a flickering streetlight. The sound of tires screeching filled the air, and she saw a car lose control, spinning across the street before crashing into a guardrail. She ran toward it in the dream, But no matter how fast she moved, the car stayed far away, like it was fading into the dark. She woke up with her heart pounding. It felt too real, too vivid. She sat up, trying to shake off the feeling. The dream had shown her a street sign, one she didn't recognize, but she remembered the name clearly. Maple Hill Road. She wrote it down on a small notepad beside her bed, thinking maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her because of the voicemail. Still, it unsettled her. The next morning, she decided to check something. Before heading to work, she searched Maple Hill Road on her phone. To her surprise, it was a real place, about 30 minutes away from her city. Her stomach tightened as she scrolled through the images. It looked almost exactly like the place in her dream. Quiet, lined with old streetlights and trees. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, unsure of what to think. Could a dream really show her something real? It didn't make sense. She laughed softly to herself and tried to shake it off. Maybe she had seen the name somewhere before without realizing it. When she arrived at the hospital, everything felt normal again. Patients were coming in, doctors were moving quickly, nurses were busy. Life went on. She tried to bury the thoughts of that strange call deep inside her mind, but fate had other plans. That afternoon, as she walked past the nurse's station, she heard one of the paramedics talking. There was a bad car crash last night on Maple Hill Road. One guy was pulled out just in time. He's in critical condition. The words hit her like a wave. Maple Hill Road. Her heart started racing. She turned toward the paramedic and asked, "What time did it happen?" He checked his report. Around midnight. Maybe a little after 12. Her hands went cold. Midnight. That was when the missed call came in, 12:07 a.m. She didn't know what to say. Her mind went blank, her heart thudding in her chest. For the rest of the day, she couldn't focus. The connection between the call, the voice, and the accident felt too strong to ignore. It couldn't be a coincidence. But how could it be real? That night, she sat by her window looking out at the city lights. The phone was on the table beside her, silent, almost like it was keeping secrets. She replayed the voicemail again, listening closely to every sound in the background. The faint noise of traffic, a breath, maybe even a distant horn. It all sounded so real now. Knowing there had been an accident around that time, she didn't tell anyone else. How could she? Who would believe that a missed call might be connected to something like that? She didn't even believe it herself, but deep inside she felt a pull, as if something was guiding her toward a truth she hadn't yet discovered. As the night went on, the phone stayed quiet. The world outside slowed down, but Lila sat awake, staring at the dark screen, wondering if maybe, just maybe, that call was meant for her, and she had missed more than just a ring. Maybe she had missed a moment that could have changed everything. Lila woke up feeling uneasy. The image of that road and the sound of the man's voice wouldn't leave her mind. She had barely slept and her eyes were tired, but she couldn't stop thinking about what the paramedic said. A crash on Maple Hill Road around midnight. It was the same time the missed call came in. She sat on the edge of her bed holding her phone. It looked so harmless, so ordinary, yet it carried something strange now and like a mystery trapped inside it. She opened her call log again, staring at the unknown number. She whispered the digits under her breath, trying to memorize them, as if saying them might make some sense appear. Before leaving for work, she decided to check the news on her phone. She searched for Maple Hill Road accident, and sure enough, there it was. A report about a serious car crash that had happened the night before. The article said a man in his early 30s was critically injured after losing control of his car. The police were still investigating. Lila's heart sank as she scrolled through the article. There was no photo of the victim, just a picture of the wrecked car under a streetlight. For a moment, she thought about how helpless that man must have felt. What if he was the one who had called her? What if he had dialed the wrong number trying to reach someone for help? At work, she tried to stay busy, but her mind kept drifting. She was checking a patient's chart when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her breath caught for a second. She thought maybe it was another call from that number. But when she looked, it was just a message from her friend asking about lunch. She felt both relieved and disappointed at the same time. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the small cafeteria sipping tea. Her friend came over and sat beside her, noticing her quiet mood. "You've been distracted all morning," her friend said gently. "What's going on?" Lila hesitated. She didn't want to sound crazy, but the weight of it was getting too heavy to keep to herself. So she told her. About the missed call, the strange voicemail, the dream, and the accident that happened around the same time. Her friend listened carefully, her face serious. "That's strange," she said slowly, "but maybe it's just coincidence. You know, our minds sometimes connect random things when we're stressed." "Maybe," Lila said softly, stirring her tea. "But what if it wasn't random? What if that call was meant for me somehow?" Her friend smiled kindly. "Then maybe there's a reason for it. But don't let it eat you up. You can't change what already happened." Lila nodded, but the uneasiness stayed. When she returned to her ward that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A new patient was being brought in, a man who had just been transferred from another hospital after a serious accident. The nurses gathered around to help move him to a room. He was still unconscious, with bandages on his head and bruises on his face. Lila's shift leader asked her to help monitor his condition. She walked closer and checked his chart. When she read the name, her stomach flipped. It was the same name she had read in the news article that morning, the man from the Maple Hill Road crash. Her hands trembled as she set the chart down. She looked at his face again, pale and still, and for some reason, she felt a strange pull, like she already knew him somehow, though she had never met him before. For the rest of the day, she couldn't stop glancing at him while working. The machines beeped softly, measuring his heartbeat, his breathing, his fragile connection to life. She felt an ache in her chest watching him lie there, fighting to stay alive. That evening, as her shift ended, she stood quietly by his bedside for a few minutes. She whispered softly, though she didn't know why. "I don't know who you are, but I think you tried to call me." The man didn't move, of course, but just saying the words made her eyes fill with tears. She gently placed his chart back and left the room, but something inside her told her this was not the end. Days passed, and Lila continued to check on the patient every day. He remained unconscious, but his condition was slowly improving. She noticed small changes, and his breathing became steadier. His fingers twitched occasionally, and once, she thought she saw his eyelids move. Each time she entered his room, she felt a calm she couldn't explain. Sometimes she even talked to him while adjusting his IV or checking his pulse. She told him small things about her day, about how the weather was outside, about how she hoped he would wake up soon. Her co-workers teased her gently for being so attached to one patient, but she didn't mind. There was something about him that she couldn't walk away from. One night, while she was on the late shift, the hospital was quieter than usual. The sound of footsteps echoed softly in the hallway, and most of the lights were dim. Lila walked into his room to check on him before her break. She adjusted his blanket and checked the monitors. Everything was stable. Then she noticed his hand move slightly. It wasn't much, just a small twitch, but it was enough to make her freeze. She leaned closer and said softly, "Can you hear me?" His fingers moved again, this time more clearly. She pressed the call button for the doctor, and within seconds other staff rushed in. The doctor checked his vitals and nodded. "He's responding. This is a good sign." After they left, Lila stayed behind for a moment. She smiled faintly, whispering, "You're coming back." The next morning she was off duty, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. She wanted to know if he had woken up. She tried to distract herself by cleaning her apartment and doing laundry, but her mind kept returning to the hospital. By the afternoon, she gave in and decided to stop by, even though it wasn't her shift. When she entered the ward, one of the nurses smiled. "Your patient opened his eyes this morning," she said.
"He's weak, but he's conscious." Lila felt her heart race.
She quietly walked into his room. The man was awake, his eyes half open, looking confused but calm. When he saw her, his gaze lingered for a moment, as if trying to recognize her. She smiled gently. "You've been asleep for a while. How do you feel?" His voice was rough, almost a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're at the hospital," she said softly. "You were in an accident, but you're safe now." He blinked slowly, trying to piece things together. "Accident," he murmured. Crash?" "Yes," she replied. "It happened a few nights ago." He looked around weakly. "Phone," he whispered. "Did anyone find my phone?" Lila hesitated. "I don't think so," she said gently. "It might have been damaged in the crash." He looked troubled, closing his eyes for a moment. "I tried to call my sister," he said slowly, "but I think I dialed the wrong number." Those words sent chills through her. She felt her breath catch. He continued, "It was dark. I lost control of the car. I just remember trying to reach someone before it happened. Lila couldn't speak for a moment. Her heart pounded as she realized what that meant. He had been the one who called her. The missed call, the voicemail. It was all from him, moments before the crash. She took a deep breath and said softly, "You called me." He turned his head slightly, his tired eyes meeting hers. "You?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I got your call. But I was asleep. I missed it." He stared at her for a long moment. Then a faint smile appeared on his face, even through the pain. "Then maybe you were meant to find me anyway." Lila felt tears fill her eyes. She didn't know what to say. She reached for his hand gently, squeezing it. "I'm just glad you're alive." The man closed his eyes again, exhausted, but still smiling faintly. "Maybe everything happens the way it should," he murmured. Lila sat beside him quietly for a while after that. The machines beeped softly, the lights glowed faintly, and the world outside felt far away. She didn't understand how fate had connected them, but in that moment she didn't need to. All she knew was that a missed call had somehow brought two strangers together in the most unexpected way. As she left his room, she looked down at her phone one last time. The old missed call notification was still there, one unanswered ring that had changed everything. The next few days passed slowly, but something in Lila's heart felt lighter. Knowing that the man had finally woken up gave her a quiet kind of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. Every time she walked past his room, she found herself smiling a little. He was recovering slowly. His body was weak and his speech was still soft, but his eyes carried a calm strength. Each day, Lila would stop by after her shift to check on him, even when she wasn't assigned to his care. She would ask if he needed anything, or just talk to him for a few minutes. Sometimes she brought him tea. Other times she just sat beside his bed, telling him stories about small things from her day. He seemed to listen carefully, as though every word helped him stay connected to the world outside the hospital walls. One afternoon, when she walked in, he looked at her and smiled faintly. "You came again," he said quietly. "I told you I would," Lila replied with a small laugh. "You're my favorite patient now." He chuckled weakly, though it turned into a cough. She quickly poured him some water and helped him sit up a little. When he finished drinking, he looked thoughtful. "I still can't believe you were the one who got that call," he said softly. "It's strange, isn't it? Out of all the people in the world, it was you." Lila nodded slowly. "I think about it every day," she admitted. "At first it scared me. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but now I feel like it wasn't an accident at all." He looked at her with quiet curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it," she said, looking down at her hands. "Sometimes life connects people in ways we don't understand. Maybe that call was supposed to happen. Maybe I was supposed to find you here." For a moment they both sat in silence, letting the words sink in. The room was filled only with the soft hum of the machines and the distant sounds of hospital life. Nurses walking, monitors beeping, voices fading in and out. He smiled gently. "I like that thought," he said finally. "Maybe things happen for a reason, even the small ones." Over the next week, his strength began to return. He started sitting up more, talking longer, even walking short distances with support. The doctors were pleased with his progress, and the nurses often said his recovery was faster than expected. One morning, while Lila was checking his chart, he asked, "Can I tell you something strange?" She smiled. "Only if it's not too strange." "When I was in the car that night," he said slowly, "I remember trying to call my sister. I was panicking, my hands were shaking, and I must have pressed the wrong button. I didn't even realize it until I heard the call ring. Then it went to voicemail. I left a message, but everything after that is a blur." Lila listened quietly, her heart tightening with every word. He continued, When I woke up here and saw you, I had this strange feeling, and like I'd seen you before. Maybe not in real life, but somehow familiar." "Does that sound crazy?" Lila smiled softly. "Not at all," she said. "I had a dream that night. About the crash. Before I even knew it happened." His eyes widened slightly. "Really?" "Yes," she said. "I saw the street sign. I didn't know where it was, but later, I found out it was the same road from the accident. It felt so real." He was silent for a moment, processing her words. "Maybe there's something we don't understand," he said quietly. Maybe we're all connected somehow even before we meet. Lila didn't know what to say, but deep down she felt the same. There was something about their connection that went beyond coincidence. As the days turned into weeks, they grew closer. Their conversations became longer, more personal. He told her about his life before the accident, how he worked in construction, how he was saving up to start a small business with his sister, how he had spent that night driving home after visiting a friend. Lila shared bits of her own life too, her love for helping people, how she had moved to the city alone to become a nurse, and how sometimes she felt like she was just existing day by day without much purpose beyond her job. One evening, after most of the ward had quieted down, she sat by his bedside while he looked out the window. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You know," he said softly, "before that night I kept thinking about how I was always too busy to slow down. I was always rushing, always tired, never really noticing life around me. But lying here for weeks, it made me realize how fragile everything is." Lila nodded. "I think we all forget that sometimes," she said. "We get caught up in work and routines and small worries, until something reminds us how precious time really is." He turned his head toward her, his voice quiet. "Maybe that call wasn't just a mistake. Maybe it was the universe's way of making me slow down and meet someone I was supposed to meet." Her heart skipped for a second and she felt warmth rise to her face. She smiled softly but didn't reply. From that day on, Lila found herself looking forward to seeing him more than she expected. She told herself it was just compassion, that she cared because he was her patient. But deep down, she knew it was something more. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something gentle, something real. Whenever he made small jokes, she laughed. When he was in pain, her chest ached. When he smiled, she felt lighter. It was as if a bond had quietly formed between two people who were never meant to meet, and yet, somehow did. One night, as she was about to leave after her shift, she passed his room and saw him awake, staring at the ceiling. She hesitated, then walked in. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Too many thoughts? Good thoughts or bad ones?" "A bit of both," he said honestly. "I keep thinking about that call, about how if you had answered, things might have turned out differently. Maybe I wouldn't have crashed. Or maybe it would have been worse. I don't know." Lila sat down beside him. "I've thought about that too," she admitted. "For days I kept asking myself, what if I had picked up? But now I think maybe it happened exactly how it was supposed to." He looked at her curiously. "Why do you say that?" "Because if I had answered," she said slowly, "maybe you wouldn't have been here, and I wouldn't have met you." There was a long pause. His eyes softened and a small smile formed on his lips. "Then I guess I'm glad you missed the call," he said quietly. Lila felt her chest tighten, a strange mixture of sadness and comfort washing over her. She smiled back, her eyes glistening slightly. After that night, their conversations became filled with warmth, laughter, shared memories, even dreams about the future. He often told her how he wanted to start fresh once he was discharged, how he wanted to appreciate life more deeply. Lila listened, inspired by his strength and hope. Weeks later, the doctor said he would soon be well enough to leave. The news made Lila happy but also unexpectedly sad. She knew she would miss seeing him every day, hearing his quiet jokes, sharing small talks during long shifts. On his last day at the hospital, he was sitting by the window when Lila walked in with a small cup of tea, his favorite. He smiled when he saw her. "So this is it," he said softly. "I'm finally getting out of here." She nodded, trying to keep her smile steady. "You deserve it. You've come a long way." He looked at her for a long moment as if searching for the right words. "You know," he said, "I don't think I would have made it without you. You kept talking to me even when I couldn't respond. Somehow I think I heard you." Lila felt a lump in her throat. "You would have made it anyway," she said gently. "You're stronger than you think." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and sincere. "Still," he said softly, "thank you for being there, for answering the call, even if it wasn't the first one." She squeezed his hand, smiling through her tears. "You're welcome." When he left that afternoon, Lila stood by the window watching the car drive away. The sunlight shimmered on the glass, and for a moment, she saw her reflection beside the empty bed. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes a missed call isn't the end of something, it's the beginning." She turned off the lights and walked out, not knowing that their paths would cross again soon, in a way that would once more remind her that fate doesn't always need a reason to bring two souls together. Weeks passed since the day he left the hospital, and life at work slowly went back to normal for Lila. The days were filled with patience, the steady rhythm of medical routines, and the constant sound of footsteps echoing down the halls, but something inside her felt missing. She had gotten used to seeing him every day, hearing his quiet laugh, the way he looked out the window as if searching for answers in the clouds. Now his bed was empty, and every time she passed by, she felt a small ache in her heart. She told herself it was just part of her job, that she'd felt similar things before when patients she'd grown close to finally left. But deep down she knew this was different. There was a connection between them that she couldn't explain. Some evenings after her shift she would sit alone in her apartment, sipping tea, staring at her phone. She still had the voicemail from that night saved in her inbox. Sometimes she listened to it again, that trembling voice saying, "Please, it's urgent. Call me back." It no longer scared her. It felt like a reminder of something bigger than coincidence. One Saturday morning, Lila went out to buy groceries. The market was busy, filled with chatter and the smell of fresh bread. She was walking through the fruit aisle when she heard someone say her name softly. She turned around, and there he was, standing a few feet away, smiling at her. For a second she froze, surprised but overjoyed. "You're here," she said, laughing a little. "You look so much better." He nodded, a shy smile on his face. "I'm still healing, but I wanted to start getting out again. I didn't expect to run into you like this." They talked for a while right there between the apples and oranges, catching up on how he'd been. He told her he was going to physical therapy and was almost back to normal. He thanked her again for all her help during his recovery, but she told him she had just done her job. Still, he insisted. "You did more than that," he said quietly. "You made me believe that I could make it." Her cheeks warmed at his words. There was something genuine and kind about the way he said things. Not forced, not overly emotional, just real. Before they said goodbye, he asked if they could meet for coffee sometime. "I want to thank you properly," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "All right, but you're buying." They met a few days later at a small cafe near the park. The place had large windows and soft music playing in the background. They talked for hours, not just about the accident, but about life, their families, dreams, fears, and the strange twists that had led them here. At one point, he said quietly, "You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you'd answered that call. Would things have been different?" Lila looked down at her cup, thinking for a moment. "Maybe," she said softly. "But maybe this was the only way it could happen. Maybe fate doesn't always need logic." He nodded, smiling gently. "I like that." After that day, they started meeting often. Sometimes it was just for a walk in the park, other times a quick lunch near the hospital. Lila found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. She felt comfortable with him, like she could be herself without pretending. One afternoon, while they were sitting on a park bench, he looked thoughtful. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" he asked. "Of course," Lila said. He took a slow breath. "The night of the crash, I wasn't just driving home. I was on my way to my father's house. We hadn't spoken in years because of a fight. I wanted to fix things that night. That's why I was so nervous. I almost turned back twice, but something told me to go." He paused, his eyes distant. "When the accident happened, I thought that was it. I remember thinking, this is how it ends, without fixing anything, without saying sorry. But then, I woke up in that hospital and you were there. It felt like I was given another chance." Lila listened quietly, feeling the weight of his words. "Did you ever talk to your father after that?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, a few weeks ago I called him. We talked for hours. He came to see me. We're trying again." "That's wonderful," Lila said softly. "Maybe that's the real reason you got that second chance." He looked at her, his eyes gentle but serious. "Maybe you were part of that reason too." Lila felt her heart skip. There was something in the way he said it. Not romantic, not dramatic, just deeply sincere. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger. They laughed easily together, shared small moments, and found comfort in silence. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt seen, not just as a nurse or a helper, but as herself. One evening, it started raining as they left a cafe. They ran through the street, laughing like children. When they finally stopped under a small awning, soaked but happy, Lila looked at him and said between laughs, "I can't remember the last time I did something this silly." He smiled, brushing water from his hair. "Maybe you needed to," she nodded, still catching her breath. "Maybe I did." As they stood there watching the rain, there was a quiet moment between them, the kind that doesn't need words. It wasn't love at first sight or something out of a movie. It was real, gentle, human, something that felt right. Later that week, he visited the hospital to thank some of the staff who had helped him. Lila introduced him to a few nurses, and everyone was happy to see how far he'd come. When they were alone for a moment, he handed her a small note. "I wrote something for you," he said shyly. "You don't have to read it now." That night after her shift, Lila sat on her couch and unfolded the note. It said, "The night I called you, I thought I was calling for help. But maybe I was calling for hope. I think somehow that's what you gave me. You showed me that even strangers can feel like home. Thank you for missing the call and still answering it in your own way." Tears filled her eyes as she read the words. She sat there in the quiet room, holding the note close to her chest. It felt like a message from fate itself. Over the next few months, they stayed close. They celebrated small victories: his full recovery, her promotion at work, their shared laughter that seemed endless. Lila felt like her life had opened up again, like the gray walls around her heart had finally cracked to let in some light. But one afternoon, as she was leaving work, she saw him standing near the hospital entrance. His face looked pale, his hands trembling slightly. She rushed over. "What's wrong?" she asked, worried. He took a breath, trying to steady himself. "I just came from the doctor," he said quietly. "They found something from the accident, an old injury that didn't heal properly. It's not life-threatening, but I might need another surgery." Lila felt her heart tighten. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "You just got back on your feet." He tried to smile. "I'll be fine. I just didn't want to hide it from you. I didn't want to disappear again without saying anything." She reached out and held his hand gently. "You're not going through it alone this time," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, I'm here." He looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes said everything: gratitude, fear, and something deeper. That evening, they sat together on a hospital bench, the city lights glowing outside. Neither spoke much. They didn't need to. Sometimes silence carries more comfort than words ever could. As the night grew quiet, Lila thought back to that first night, the missed call, the unknown number, the feeling that something was about to change. She realized now that it wasn't just about fate or mystery. It was about connection, the invisible thread that ties two people together when they least expect it. Before leaving, he looked at her and said softly, "You know, I used to think that call was my biggest mistake. But now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Lila smiled gently. "Maybe some missed calls aren't mistakes," she said. "Maybe they're just life's way of making sure the right people find each other, even if it takes a little time." They both smiled, and for the first time, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt full, of understanding, of gratitude, and of a bond that no accident, no distance could ever undo. Days passed after that night when he told her about the surgery he might need. Lila tried to stay calm and supportive, but inside she was worried. She had seen countless patients go through surgeries, some successful, others not so lucky. But this was different. This time her heart was involved. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He told her, "It's just a minor procedure. They just need to fix something that didn't heal right." But the way he avoided her eyes when he said it made her feel that he was more scared than he let on. The following week, he was admitted again to the same hospital, the same room, the same quiet window view that once framed their first conversations. When Lila walked in that morning, he smiled weakly. "Feels strange being back here," he said. "Almost like time has looped around." She smiled softly, trying to lighten the mood. "At least this time you have a nurse who already knows your favorite soup." He chuckled. "That's true, though I'll never admit how bad that soup really was." They both laughed, and for a moment the air felt lighter. Over the next few days, she visited him whenever she could. Between her shifts, she'd stop by with small things: a book, a warm drink, sometimes just a smile. She noticed how he tried to stay positive, even joking with the staff. But there were moments when he'd go quiet, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. She could tell his mind was wrestling with something deeper. One evening, she stayed a little longer after her shift ended. The hospital halls were quieter, lights dimmed, and the sound of beeping machines filled the silence. She pulled a chair near his bed and sat down. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Of course," he replied. "If that night hadn't happened, if you hadn't made that call, where do you think you'd be now?" He thought for a while, his gaze distant. "Honestly? Probably still angry at life. Still avoiding people. Still holding on to things I should have let go of long ago." He looked at her then and smiled gently. "That accident, it broke me, but it also woke me up. Sometimes pain opens doors we didn't know existed." Lila nodded, her heart heavy but full. "Maybe that's why fate works the way it does. It doesn't ask for our permission. It just pushes us where we need to go." He smiled again, that same soft look that always made her chest tighten. "I think you were part of that push." The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. Lila stayed up late that night, unable to sleep. She kept replaying everything in her head. The night of the missed call, the first time she saw him, the laughter, the long talks. Life was strange, she thought. One missed call had led her to all this. The next day was long and quiet. She couldn't focus on her rounds, constantly glancing at the clock. Every hour felt like 10. Finally, she saw the surgeon come out of the operating room. Lila rushed over, her heart pounding. "It went well," the doctor said with a small smile. "He's resting now." Relief washed over her like a wave. She took a deep breath and thanked him before hurrying to recovery. When she saw him, still half asleep but breathing steadily, she felt tears sting her eyes. She sat beside him and held his hand gently, whispering, "You did it." For the next few weeks, she stayed by his side through the recovery. She wasn't required to. She wasn't even officially his nurse anymore. But she couldn't stay away. It wasn't obligation. It was care. There were hard days, pain, frustration, small setbacks. But there were good days too, laughter, stories, and a growing sense that they were both changing in ways they couldn't fully explain. One afternoon, while they were sitting by the window, he said quietly, "You know, I used to believe everything in life had to make sense, that there was a reason for everything. But now I think maybe life isn't about reasons. Maybe it's about moments, the ones that change us even when we don't understand them." Lila smiled. "I think you're right. We try so hard to control everything, but maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe we just have to listen when life whispers or when it rings." He laughed softly. "Even if we miss the call?" "Especially if we miss it," she said, smiling. Months passed. He recovered fully this time, stronger than before. He started working again, helping others who had gone through similar accidents. He often spoke about second chances, about how a single moment can change everything. Lila attended one of his talks once, quietly sitting in the back. She listened as he told the audience, "Sometimes the people who save us don't even know they're doing it. Sometimes they're just answering life in their own way, with kindness." After the event, he found her outside, waiting near the steps. "You were there," he said, surprised but happy. "I wouldn't miss it," she said. They walked together for a while, the evening breeze cool and calm. He told her about his plans, to volunteer, to help in rehabilitation centers, to travel and share his story. Lila listened, proud of how far he'd come, but a small part of her wondered where she fit in his new life. She didn't say it, but he must have sensed it because he stopped walking and turned to her. "You know," he said quietly, "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She smiled, shaking her head. "You give me too much credit." "No," he said softly. "You answered that call, just in a different way. You showed up when I needed it most, and that's something I'll never forget." There was something final but peaceful in his tone, as if he was closing a chapter. Not ending it, just letting it rest where it belonged. In the following weeks, life moved forward. They still met often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to talk. But things were lighter now. There was no pain between them, just warmth, the kind that stays even when people take different paths. One quiet evening, Lila sat by her window at home, the city lights twinkling below. Her phone buzzed beside her and she smiled. For a second, she thought of that first missed call, the one that had started it all. She remembered how frightened she'd been that night, how uncertain, and now years later she realized something. Missing that call wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. Life had a strange way of bringing people together, not always through answers, but through the spaces in between them. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, "Sometimes the calls we miss lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. It was from him. Inside was a photo, the two of them smiling near the hospital garden, sunlight in their faces. On the back he'd written, "I used to think fate was cruel for making me crash that night. Now I see it differently. Maybe fate wasn't breaking me. Maybe it was introducing me to someone who would help me find myself again." She held the photo for a long time, smiling through quiet tears. It wasn't sadness, and it was gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the connection, for the reminder that even small choices can change everything. Years later, whenever she passed that same hospital hallway where she first saw him, she'd pause for a moment. Sometimes she'd hear the faint echo of that missed call in her memory, the one she never answered. And every time she'd smile, because now she knew that call wasn't meant to be answered by phone. It was meant to be answered by heart. She carried that truth with her through her work, her friendships, her life. Whenever someone asked her why she still believed in kindness or in fate, she'd tell them, because sometimes the smallest pause, the tiniest choice, can change someone's world. You may never know it, but one moment of care can echo for a lifetime. And she was right, because somewhere out there, a man who once thought his life had ended now stood on a stage sharing hope with others. And somewhere else, a woman who once feared she'd failed learned that missing one call had led her to answer life in a way far more powerful than she ever imagined. They didn't need to speak every day to stay connected. Some bonds simply stay, quiet, unbroken, and eternal. That night, as she placed the photo on her shelf, she whispered a soft thank you to the universe, for that call she never picked up, for the stranger who became a friend, and for the gentle reminder that sometimes the things we miss are not losses. They're beginnings.